Thank you for your interest in our research. Our article sheds light on the ethics of PeaceTech and how they contribute to the socio-technical ordering of the international. In the past years, international peacebuilding actors have increasingly relied on new technologies to advance their agendas and objectives, and with that came a distinct moral discourse on how to use such technologies. Now, our article sheds light on the productive power of this discourse, and it shows how it can compromise the very goals of international peacebuilding. In a nutshell, we found that the discourse produces a cascade of responsibility that reaches from the international to the local, from the public to the private sector and civil society, and from organizations to end users. And we describe how this can amount to what we call Decentred dereliction.
To set the stage, let me take you back to the year 2020, when the United Nations first trialed an AI-powered consultation platform in order to support the peacemaking efforts in Libya and Yemen. The digital dialogue platforms were meant to enhance the inclusivity of these processes, and so thousands of residents were invited to participate, to log on, and to share their hopes and expectations for the future. This is only one example of how the growing use of digital technologies by humanitarians, diplomats, and peace builders has facilitated forms of international cooperation that are increasingly remote and decentered. Smartphones, satellites, and secure servers connect the UN headquarters in New York or Geneva with Silicon Valley-based tech companies and civil society organizations on the ground that facilitate the rollout of technology-enabled programs. There are many other examples of this, such as remote consultations via text messaging services, mobile phone apps to submit conflict early warning data, or social media campaigns to promote political change. But when such applications are used, ensuring anonymity and data security are of central concern, as politically sensitive views could put participants at odds with political parties or armed groups. To mitigate against such risks, various peacebuilding organizations have recently issued best practice guidelines addressed to their staff and affiliated organizations, instructing them on how to use technology for peace more ethically. We refer to the totality of these principles, best practices, and training resources as a discourse on the ethics of PeaceTech.
So, you may have heard of ethics washing, the phenomenon where companies or other organizations adopt certain ethical policies, guidance, establish ethics boards, and so on, in order to maintain their image and to avoid external regulation and control. Part of ethics washing is what's called ethics shopping, which is that the organizations will choose ethical principles that fit their predefined goals and practices, instead of starting from the question of what would be ethically desirable and then adjusting their enterprise thereto. Now, in our study, we've looked at actors that are really defined by a benevolent ethical purpose and that really rely on their ethical reputation as digital peace builders. What we find is that when they then include ethical policies and guidance in their work, they still distribute the responsibility for carrying these principles out in practice, for implementing the policies, down a chain of what we call a risk responsibility cascade, resulting in a certain moral division of labor.
Concretely, we analyzed more than 40 documents that formulate suggestions and guidelines for the ethical use of PeaceTech, and we also drew on interview material. We used qualitative data analysis to map normative vectors, which we understand as patterns of fact and value claims that frame risks, suggest specific responses, and attribute responsibilities for them. In the process, we clustered the targets of these vectors along 5 main domains, reaching from the international to the local and the end user. By grouping those normative vectors that are aimed at the same target domain, we identified 5 main tendencies that lead to the cascading of risks and responses, namely the internationalizing, outsourcing, delegating, localizing, and individualizing of moral responsibilities. And just as important is the pattern in which risks are distributed. The higher an actor is placed in the cascade, the more systemic and abstract the risks are. And the lower an actor is placed, the more personal and tangible the risks become. Now, this cascading of risks and responsibilities through PeaceTech ethics can have very real and relevant consequences. Where end users take on risks, digital peacebuilding interventions may harm their most vulnerable contributors. And where end users decide to not take on risks, digital peacebuilding can become compromised. For instance, when participants log out of online conversations or self-censor their voice. So we show that this makes it more likely that the stated objectives of digital interventions are not realized. And this is why we argue in this article that the socio-technical ordering of global politics through PeaceTech ethics can contribute to Decentred dereliction, the abandonment of goals in and through digital peacebuilding.